Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. We are here in the studio where we do the great work of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent here on what has become the #1 podcast in all of STEM and technical education. Because we're so focused on that next generation of the workforce, we talk a lot on this podcast about how this next generation is a little bit different than generations before. It's certainly my generation, different maybe values in terms of what they want to get out of work, why they do the work that we do or that they do. They talk about purpose, and we hear a lot that this generation, whether it's the alpha generation, whether it's Gen Z, they want this purpose in the work that they are doing. But what does that really mean? And is purpose enough? And is it enough for businesses and organizations that have their own missions and their own goals as they try to get ahead? Is it enough just to have purpose, especially in this age of advancing and emerging technologies? We have a terrific guest this week to talk with us about exactly those topics. And what does it mean when we talk about purpose? What does it mean when we talk about the future of the American workforce? His name is Pete Dulcamara, and he is a former researcher, a former senior executive at Kimberly-Clark. A lot of us know that from the consumer goods. He spent time at Dow Chemical as well. He wrote a book called High Tech Heroes, and we're looking forward to learning about that book as well. So, Pete, so awesome to have you with us on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Thank you so much, Matt. Real pleasure to be here, and I really look forward to it. And I love your mission, and it's very consistent with what I'm trying to do as well.
Awesome. I love the work you're doing. I love the energy that you put into it. So let's start with this. You know, Kimberly-Clark, if people don't know the company, they definitely know the products, and feel free to mention some of those as we talked through this. I spent a good part of your career at Dow Chemical, and certainly lots of people know that organization as well. All of these are products that are used by millions and millions of people. Talk to us about your career, and not just your career, but what you learned along the way about creating products, researching products, developing products for real world impact.
Yeah, no, happy to. I was with the Dow Chemical for 18 years in research and development, new business development, sustainable development, and then with Kimberly-Clark for 17 years. And what's interesting about Kimberly-Clark, in the next 24 hours, more than 2 billion people will use a Kimberly-Clark product.
Wow. Yeah, and what do we have on the planet now? 7 or 8 billion people?
Quarter of the world's population uses a Kimberly-Clark product.
Wow.
And when I first got there, I always thought, Kimberly-Clark always talks about their core competencies being the intersection of nonwovens, superabsorbents, and fiber.
Yep.
But what was really interesting working at Kimberly-Clark, what I found was their real core competency was the ability to make a product that was socially taboo. That gave people control of their life. So think of it this way. When a 12, 13-year-old girl enters puberty, she's lost control of her life.
Right.
When parents come home with a baby for the first time, they've lost control of their life.
I can tell that for sure.
When somebody has incontinence and they sneeze at a party, they've lost control of their life.
Interesting.
And every single time Kimberly-Clark was there with this product, it uses nonwoven, superabsorbents, and fiber, but really what it did was gave people control of their life in an area that's socially taboo or has some type of stigma associated with it.
Did you come up with that on your own, or is that kind of the mission, or is that
that's just my thinking. If you ask somebody at KC, what is our core competency?
Right.
It's, fibers, superabsorbents, that kind of stuff, maybe even marketing.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than that, and that's so important to understand what a company's true core competencies are. And that's really what I learned in research and development, was this idea of empathetic understanding. Not only of your customer, but of your colleagues. And really everybody you come in contact with is to really understand what is their true need that they're trying to solve. Everybody has a problem.
Right.
And so if you can provide a solution to that problem, and then where research and development comes in is research really provides what I'll call a reason to believe that the solution's actually going to work.
Right.
And for the business, it's a reason to believe at a price I can afford.
Okay.
And so that was the biggest insight for me.
Right.
And I used to tell researchers all this time, don't go into the laboratory till you understand 3 things. What's the consumer insight? What's the brand promise? And what's the claim going to be on the side of the box at the end of the day?
Right.
And if you can't tell me those three things, you really don't have a project.
Yep,
And so it was really this idea of becoming much more business-centric in my thinking, much more consumer-centric,
Sure.
rather than technology-centric.
I remember sitting in a meeting with a board chair of a company that I was helping to run. There were several of us, I guess 2 or 3 of us in the leadership team that were leading a company in the RFID and technology space. And this goes all the way back to the early part of the mid to 1990s, early to mid 1990s. So it goes back quite a ways. And our board chair was a guy named Bela Marodi. Bela passed away just a couple of short years ago, well into his 90s. In fact, I think closing in on 100, had a really long, productive life. But we sat down in a meeting, and this was a company that built RFID security systems, or our radio frequency security systems for the healthcare market. And he asked us what we did as a company, and what were we selling is his question. And a couple of us said, well, we sell radio frequency identification security systems, and it was really the products we were selling were preventing babies from being abducted from hospitals, and Alzheimer's patients or dementia, people suffering from dementia, from wandering out of a long-term care facility. And so going through this, we all described the product, right? And he helped us understand that we're not really selling that hardware or that software. What we're selling is peace of mind, and we're selling, the safety of people's lives, which is totally different. Taking it in the same way that you did from selling paper products or being a marketing company to saying, this is how we fundamentally impact the lives of the people that we're serving. And I think whether you're in research and development, marketing, operations, senior leadership, whatever, understanding how whatever organization you're involved in changes people's lives, certainly important. And I would say that, looking back at that period of my life, had a certain criteria, if you will, of what I meant by success and what I viewed as a success in my career. Here I am now, some 30, 40 years later, or whatever it is, 30 years later, that definition is way different for me than it was back then. And I'd be curious on that, just reflecting on that definition of success. What was it for you? What is it? What should it be? And has that evolved over the course of your career?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I believe there's these 4 S curves in life. I'll only talk about 2. Maybe we can go into the other 2 if you want. But, it seems like the first S curve is what I call struggle to success.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter what you start in life, starting a podcast, starting algebra, becoming a dad, whatever it might be.
I was better at some of those than others, I'll tell you. I'll let you guess which one.
But, you struggle at first, but with some persistence, you finally hit an inflection point with a little bit of effort, you become successful.
Sure.
But what I found, and so early in my career, success was climbing the ladder, titles, more responsibility. I remember thinking to myself, when somebody sees this, I'm just going to knock their socks off. It was all about trying to impress other people with about how smart I was, how competent I was, how capable I was. Yep. That's what drove me. And that's that first S curve, which is struggle to success, which is all about, in my opinion, adding value to yourself. The second S curve is service over self, to gain greater significance in life.
Got it.
And that's really the transition that I've gone on through my career. And where it all started was in 1997, my wife became pregnant for our first child, Rachel.
Okay.
And that Christmas, I remember sitting there asking myself, what had I accomplished in life? What did I want to accomplish in life? And what do I want my legacy to be?
Sure.
And I developed this personal mission statement, which is to help raise children that live a life fulfilled.
Awesome.
And help create businesses that improve people's lives.
Okay.
And that's been my North Star since 1997. It's the reason I left Dow to come to Kimberly-Clark. It's the reason I left management to become chief scientist for the company.
Sure.
It's the reason I left Kimberly-Clark to start my own business and write my book.
Right.
Was this idea of how do I help others create businesses that improve people's lives? And so for me, success used to be about waking up in the morning, asking myself, how do I make Pete Dulcamara as successful as possible? But as my career went on and as I've aged and in life, it's really about waking up in the morning and asking myself, how can I make Matt Kirkner as successful as possible?
Yep.
How can I make every single person that I interact with as successful as possible? And I really do believe by doing that, I'll gain greater significance in life.
No question.
And that's really what I'm looking for, is
Beautiful.
significance over success.
Love that. What are the other two S's, just while we're at it? You don't have to take
Yeah,
notes.
the other two S curves, the next S curve is what I call surrender to salvation. It's about surrendering your ego. It's about surrendering yourself, and not only gain your salvation, but the salvation for others.
Is that in the book, by the way? Or?
It is in the book.
Okay. Yeah.
And then the fourth S curve is what I call sacrifice to sanctification. I've got, without getting too religious,
Yeah.
you know, my real belief is that God's will for us is our sanctification, to become saint-like. And so the fourth S curve is to sacrifice yourself to gain sanctification.
Awesome.
In achieving God's will. So those are the four S curves: struggle to success,
Yep.
service to significance, surrender to salvation, and finally sacrifice to sanctification.
Awesome. And we wander in the spiritual every once in a while here on the Tech Ed podcast. So I know you're certainly comfortable talking about that, and so am I. So don't feel like we can't explore that as well. So I appreciate you bringing up those second two, because it's a really key part of who we are as human beings, right? And probably the most key part of who we are as human beings. And then
one last thing on those S curves is those S curves are on the axes, the y-axis, if you will, is really what I call purpose or fulfillment, but really it's a purpose.
Yep.
And then the X curve isn't effort or time, it's passion.
Yep.
So it's about finding your purpose and passion. And then each S curve is a persistence curve. So I think that combination of purpose, passion, and persistence is what moves us along through life, from success to significance to hopefully salvation and sanctification.
Awesome. And you'll find all that in High Tech Heroes, and we'll link it up and make sure people know how to get a hold of the book when after they're done listening to the podcast. We'll put that in the show notes. So appreciate you sharing all that. Really, really fascinating view of kind of how we look at the world. We started out kind of how we look at a company or an organization and how it helps its customers, how it changes lives. Talk about people and how they change lives. I know you have this whole idea along that same path of humanity-centric. Is that right? Is it
Yes,
humanity-centric
humanity.
innovation? And that differentiates itself from customer or consumer-centric innovation or business-centric innovation. So what is humanity-centric innovation? How does it differ?
Yeah. So it's first to understand what's consumer-centric innovation. And I think consumer-centric innovation happens at the creative collision of what's needed by the customer, what's required by the business, and what's possible through science and technology. And when those three things come together, that's a creative collision that creates innovation. And you can start with any one of them. You can start with a customer need.
Sure.
But if you don't have a business model where you're going to make money, right? Or you can start with
sustainable, right?
You can even have a business model where you're going to make money and you have a customer need, but if you don't have a science and technology to actually make it possible,
Right.
And so it's really bringing those three things together to create an innovation. Well, humanity-centric innovation happens at the creative collision of what are the needs of humanity?
Okay.
What are the business models of the 21st century? And what are the exponential technologies that can accelerate that so that we can solve the world's biggest problems in an economically viable way? And so when I talk about the needs of humanity, these are really captured well in the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Okay. Goals like achieving gender equality, taking climate action, responsible consumption of materials. There's 17
Who's going
of
to
them.
argue with those, right?
Yeah, they're all the stuff that we, fresh water,
Right.
all those things.
Yep.
And then the business models of the 21st century are captured really well in the book, The Future is Faster Than You Think, by Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler. And,
sure.
and he talks about 6 of these business models, things like the smartness economy of Siri, Alexa, ChatGPT, the crowd economy of Uber and Airbnb,
Sure.
The data economy of Google and Facebook.
Yep.
And then the exponential technologies, that's artificial intelligence, that's robotics, that's quantum computing, that's, biotechnology,
Sure.
It's blockchain, it's 3D printing. But the idea is to bring those three things together to solve the world's biggest problems in an economically viable way. And it's different from human-centered innovation that's
Right.
focused really on us as individual humans. It's really focused on humanity and the collective impact that science and technology can make, coupled with a business model that makes it self-sufficient.
Got it.
And it's different than charity. Charity is, I always think purpose without profit is charity.
Purpose without profit is charity. Okay, yeah. Well, and I think it's not sustainable. I mean, you can do things for them being the right reason and not necessarily enrich yourself or make money doing them, but it's really hard to sustain that model over time.
Yeah, so if you have a business model that's profitable,
right,
if you can do well by doing good, and really focus on that.
For sure.
I think that's the driving force. And what's so powerful about that is it brings clarity to a company to have purpose, to be able to communicate that to Gen Z to attract talent.
Sure. Yeah, and we'll get into that in some more detail. So it's exponential technologies, it's 21st century business models, and what was the third one?
The needs of humanity.
Needs of humanity. Got it. Very, very cool. As you were chatting about that, there were a few different things going through my mind, and I want to get in. We'll get into a little bit more detail about some of these exponential technologies. And you mentioned, whether it's blockchain, whether it's additive manufacturing, whether it's biotechnology. Super, super fascinated by that. I want to go deeper on the 21st century business model side of it as well. But I really do like that whole focus of not just doing charity for charity's sake, but having a model that sustains itself, that enables us to, whether a lot of people make a lot of money and then they give it away and they call that charity. And there's a version of that, right? Certainly there's something to be said for that. But to be able to create the sustainable model over time where you have a business organization that's doing right by its employees, doing right by its customers and its market, doing right by the rest of humanity, and being able to reinvest in that over and over and over again. Super, super important. Creates a different kind of billionaire. Now we've had plenty of billionaires, or at least several of them here on the podcast, believe it or not, over the course of 5.5 years. So we should mention to the audience, you're also a billionaire. But maybe in a little bit different way than a lot of us think when we think about billionaires. So you're talking about the idea that we should redefine what a billionaire is. And it's not just somebody who's managed to accumulate a net worth of $1 billion. It's somebody that's been able to do what?
Help 1 billion people.
Awesome.
And they're not mutually exclusive.
Of course not.
But the focus is on helping 1 billion people. And so I would really like to redefine billionaire from somebody who accumulates $1 billion to somebody who helps 1 billion people.
Awesome.
And I think we can each help 1 billion people through humanity-centric innovation. And I think there's 3 ways that that this can manifest itself. One is, you can be like an Elon Musk who actually does help 1 billion people, right? Or through a geometric progression, right? I make an impact on you, Matt, and you make an impact on 2 people, and they make an impact on 4 people. And through that geometric progression, you actually impact 1 billion lives. But there's a third way that I think is really important for us to think about, which is multi-generational. So the United Nations estimates over the last 50,000 years, 100 billion people have been born, lived, and died on this planet.
100 billion.
100 billion in the last 50,000 years.
That surprises me, just because of the way that we've seen kind of the growth over time, right? Even adding 3 billion people to the planet, probably in my lifetime, I think we went from 5 to 8. So that 50,000 years covers quite a few people before that.
Yes, and today there's about 8 billion people on the planet, a little bit, maybe 8.2 billion people on the planet. I think we don't really know how to count all the people,
exactly,
but we won't get into that.
Right.
But the United Nations estimates that over the next 50,000 years, 6.75 trillion people are yet to be born and live on this planet.
Yep.
And the question becomes, are we going to leave them enough resources to not only survive, but to thrive?
Right.
Or asked differently, when they write their history books about us, will they talk about us creating the next Dark Ages or the next Renaissance? The choice is up to us.
Yep.
And so not only being a billionaire, you have a chance to be a trillionaire.
Right.
By actually planting trees whose shade you'll never enjoy and creating systems and solutions that not only people today can flourish from, but people in the future, multi-generational. And so when I think about billionaire, those are the 3 ways that I think about billionaire: is one person impacting 1 billion, geometric progression by actually impacting people around you who impact others, to really thinking about this at a multi-generational level.
Fascinating. And you mentioned the Renaissance, the last Renaissance, of course, happening hundreds of years ago. Have you read the book The Medici Effect? Are you familiar with that
Yeah,
book?
so sure. Yeah. I mean, they
And
financed yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I mean, it's just that whole idea of, I mean, they actually financed the Renaissance.
They did. Well, and what they did was, and I got interested in this. I was preparing for a presentation to the National Center for Next Gen Manufacturing and was doing research about, in that particular presentation, and this actually gets into some of the exponential technology stuff that I want to talk about with you. In that particular conversation or that presentation, I was talking about the convergence of technologies and how it's driving all these opportunities in the marketplace. And the technologies that we were talking about were things like humanoid robotics and certainly artificial intelligence and advanced materials was in there and autonomous systems and smart sensor technology. I actually had 11 of them. And then I turned back to the Medici effect. And the thing that was interesting is, yes, the Medici family in I guess it was the 15th century, was a very, very successful family, tremendously wealthy family. And what they did was they pulled individuals from different disciplines. So it wasn't like it's just going to be the scientists that are going to advance humanity. It's the scientists, it's the financial people, it's people from the arts, it's people from from religion, people from whether it's authors, or I mentioned arts already, artists, and it's going to be the convergence of these different disciplines. And they brought all these people together, and the whole idea is, again, going back to the idea of exponential growth, is that they got so much more growth and change and innovation out of bringing people from different disciplines together and advancing the world in the way that they did through the Renaissance. It was just interesting when you start talking about what's the next generation or what's the next Renaissance going to look like. And speaking of bringing ideas together, the one thought I thought when you said, are we going to have enough resources to be able to support these trillions of people? What was the number again?
6.75 trillion, 6.75 trillion.
Yeah, 6.75 trillion,
yep.
According to the UN. And then the answer to the question is, will that person you mentioned earlier, Elon Musk, be able to put us on other planets? In which case, we probably will have those resources. But I think it really is an important question, and it kind of speaks to, as some of these technologies converge, as the world of work changes, as the next generation of the workforce advances. It's going to be a really interesting world to live in. Let's touch on, before we get into more of those technologies, which I really want to do, and I can geek out on too in a big way here on the podcast. Let's talk about that next generation. Let's use Gen Z as an example, right? And we've all heard the stories about how they're looking for something different in their work. A lot of them are so driven by this idea of purpose. But, if we can have a purpose, but if we don't have, to your earlier point, a business model that kind of also kind of in a circular way supports the purpose, and the purpose supports the financial model and so on, we can get ourselves into trouble. What are you hearing or thinking about when it comes to this next generation of employee, of worker? Is it all about purpose, and how does all that converge?
Yeah, well, what's different about Gen Z is, they're the first digital native generation.
Right.
That's one. Yep. Two is they are globally connected.
Yep. And
three, they are scared to death of the existential threat of climate change or pandemic. But I think, Gen Z, is really not only interested in purpose, but interested in making a significant difference in the world. And they want to work for a company that has purpose. And so I think there's really two audiences that we probably should talk to here. One are companies made up of largely baby boomers still, probably with some generational guilt.
Right.
But they want to attract the
They should probably have, by the way, in some cases. So that's another discussion. Go ahead.
But they want to attract Gen Z talent, and the way to attract Gen Z talent is by clarifying the purpose and passion of your organization. And Gen Z, I think they want to be a part of a company that has that clarity of purpose. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I don't know if they necessarily want the same type of career that I had.
Yep.
35 years in industry. And
70-hour weeks probably, a lot of them along the way, right?
But trying to have an impact in a collective way, in a non-conventional way, is really important to Gen Z.
Okay.
And so what my entire book is about, the title is High Tech Heroes, Why Gen Z is Our Last and Best Chance to Save the Planet.
Wow.
And so it's this idea of really enabling Gen Z. And one of the challenges I would have for everybody out there that is a baby boomer or an Xer or a millennial is to actually mentor and coach a Gen Z or Gen Alpha as they come up as well through school, and really help them find their purpose, help them find their passion, and help to implement that. Go from idea to execution is what's really important.
You think about the interest in purpose, and that's absolutely something that we see in a number of our businesses where, we can talk about everybody wants to be, paid fairly. They want to make decent money. And there's, in our day and age, or at least in mine, and I'm sure, I'm guessing maybe your experience was similar, money motivated in a lot of cases, maybe more so than I should have been. And just, you came of age when like the movie Wall Street came out, and you're like watching Gordon Gekko and,
Greed is good.
Yeah, Charlie Sheen. What's that?
Greed is good.
Greed is good. Exactly. Yeah, in fact, I'll tell you, we actually had a poster of that on the wall in my dorm room when I was at Marquette University back in the late '80s. And there's actually some truths in that, even though that antagonist, Gordon Gekko, was certainly not a decent person. There's some interesting aspects to that. But the point being that, we were so wired around Wall Street, money, success, the car you drove, the boat you owned, the size of your house, all these kind of things. And you listen to people, the later versions of the millennials and Gen Zs, and it's not how some are like that, but it's not how so many of them think. And I was literally doing business turnarounds early in my career, 80 to 100-hour weeks. I mean, my first year and a half at a company my first CEO job, which was in 1998, we worked 80 to 100 hours a week, every single week for a year and a half, and didn't think anything of it. And the business ended up being super successful, and we loved what we did. I don't necessarily see that same mix among Gen Z today. Are you seeing it the same way?
Well, it's interesting. I talked about my personal purpose, to help create businesses that improve people's lives. And what's really interesting is the whole time I was at Dow and the whole time I was at Kimberly-Clark, I never thought of myself as an employee. I really thought of it as Kimberly-Clark works for me. And it's not that I'm a megalomaniac, right? But I used to wake up.
Well, you're a billionaire.
Yeah. But I used to wake up in the morning thinking to myself, how do I use I want to create businesses that improve people's lives, but I don't have the financial or technical wherewithal to pull it off. Dow does. Kimberly-Clark does. How do I use the resources of Kimberly-Clark to help create businesses that improve people's lives? And the beauty of that was it was consistent with their own vision, which is better care for a better world. So it was very consistent. Yep. And so I was in this delusional mindset of, I'm not an employee of KC. KC works for me to achieve this mission. Yeah. And I think that's what Gen Z is looking for as well.
Delusional in a good way, though, right?
Delusional in a good way, because it was a win-win. I was actually had one big client that was called Kimberly-Clark. And what I was really trying to push KC to do, and I won't go too deep in this, but it was this idea of, in the next 24 hours, 2 billion people use a Kimberly-Clark product. They put every biological fluid known to man in those products and simply throw them away. And the question I was asking is, could we access that biomaterial and biodata to make a used product worth more than a new product? Because if a used product was worth more than a new product, you could give these products away for free. Right? And not only generate income for the company, but generate income for the consumer. I'll give you one example. Is imagine a woman in her 20s harvesting the stem cells from her menses when she's 20 years old, banking those stem cells, and then curing her own cancer when she's 80 years old with the stem cells that she harvested from a Kotex FemPad when she was 20 years old. It's that kind of that's humanity-centric innovation in a nutshell. And I think that's what Gen Z is looking for, is they want to not only have purpose and passion, but they want to make a dent in the world in a good way. And have that delusional mindset of, really, these companies work for me to achieve my purpose and passion in a way that improves people's lives. Absolutely. And that's where my whole mindset's about.
And what's interesting, and I have a really good friend who listens to the podcast regularly, and he's going to recognize the example when I give it here. it's this whole idea of finding blue sky opportunities in businesses. And, just going back on it, we're going on a little bit of a tangent here, but going back to how here in the state of Wisconsin, we have tons and tons of paper companies, right? All kinds of paper converting companies. And I would say if you ask most people, you describe Kimberly-Clark two ways. They would say, well, number one, here are the KC products that I'm familiar with that I use. And the number two thing they would say is that it's a paper converting company. And here you are talking about, advancing biotechnology, bioanalytics, and so on, using a product that somebody's utilizing, and how do I take the waste of that product and turn it into something positive? To me, that is like at the core of finding blue sky markets as well, right? And looking at your standard business model and looking at it one way. And I was guilty of this for a long time early in my career, looking at our businesses really, really narrowly, rather than finding, all right, here's where everybody else is playing, and here's how we can beat them, and here's how we can get an edge. And there's minimal purpose in that. There is minimal excitement in that, because it's just really, really hard work just to do something better, faster, cheaper, which there's nothing wrong with that, but that's a hard way to make a buck. And it's really hard to find margin in that model as well, when you're just competing with everybody else. Whereas you find a blue sky market for your business or for your product, or a way of looking at the product, or a way of bringing it to market, or a way of impacting a customer that nobody else is playing in, and you get the jump on them. There's all kinds of margin there. It's really, really fun. It's a great way to make a difference in the world. Are those two thoughts, what you just said and what I said, are those coherent and consistent?
Oh, yeah, really. What it brings to my mind is something I always talk about, is finding the primary colors of your business.
Okay.
I find it really interesting that we have three types of cones in our eyes, so we perceive three what we call primary colors. But the intersection of those three primary colors is the entire spectrum of visible light.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that I did at KC again, was what are the primary colors at Kimberly-Clark? Mm-hmm. If it's nonwoven, super absorbent, and fiber, every single product is a combination of those three things.
Sure.
And what else can you make with that combination of those primary colors?
Yep.
And so really taking some time to figure out what are the primary colors of your business? Mm-hmm. What are those core competencies that now you can put together in new combinations?
Yep.
And maybe we'll get to this in the combinatorial aspect of exponential technologies, right? Because that's really where the blue sky or blue ocean comes from.
Yep.
is at those intersections of disparate technologies to solve problems that people care about.
Yep.
Early in my career at KC, I went to Google Garage, and, a really great experience. But one of the things that Google did that I brought to Kimberly-Clark was this idea of 70-20-10. Mm-hmm. 70% of all their research is invested in search. 20% are adjacencies like maps, and 10% are wild and crazy things like self-driving cars.
Sure.
And so in research and development, it's really important that 70% of what you do is just for the existing business.
Your core business, right.
And making that as successful as possible.
Yep.
20% should be for adjacencies that you can move into with your primary colors into these blue oceans or blue sky.
Right. Yep.
And then the 10% should be really for completely transformational opportunities. But those are the highest risk. And so you got to make sure that the 70 and 20 give you carte blanche to pay for the 10.
Right.
You can't focus all your effort on the 10. And so, finding that right combination of the portfolio of 70-20-10
sure.
and your primary colors based on your core competencies,
yep.
you can evop your way into these adjacencies that really become transformative.
Yeah, no question. And you think about, it's interesting you mentioned Google. For anybody who's been in Atlanta, I think San Francisco now, Phoenix, and ridden in a self-driving car. You've had that experience, haven't you? Yeah,
mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating. More and more, I had my first experience probably 3 years ago, where literally, we dialed up an Uber and it said, "Will you accept a ride from a self-driving vehicle?"
Yeah.
And got in it, and it drove us, 3 miles in downtown Phoenix. And it was just, I'd heard about them, I'd seen videos. Until you sit in the back seat of a car in traffic that's steering itself with no driver, I think it's kind of hard to really get a good sense for how transformative that technology is. Of course, it was a Waymo car, and Waymo was a product of Google, and Waymo was a product of that 10% that you talked about, the self-driving vehicles, which is, I think, a really good opportunity to segue into some of these emerging technologies. And I mentioned some of them that we have our eyes on, autonomous vehicles, and not just cars, right? Autonomous mobile robots, Mars rovers, autonomous drones. I mean, that's a huge advancing technology that we're keeping our eyes on. Advancing materials, another huge one. Critical minerals. Had Interior Secretary Doug Burgum on the podcast not too long ago talking all about critical minerals. And then so these technologies that are advancing and changing and converging. For years, I spent time talking about what we call the exponential economy, which is, you're familiar with this. Gordon Moore, products doubling in price performance every 12 to 18 months based upon Moore's law, which is that our ability to process information at speed doubles every 12 to 18 months.
And AI is advancing every 7 months and maybe even 3 months now.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. And in fact, it's funny you bring that up because there was a conversation that I listened to about 6 or 7 years ago. And actually somebody brought me a video they had seen where they said, you know what, Moore's law is dead. Our ability to advance this technology and the realities of chip technology and microprocessing have gotten to the point where that we won't see any more advancement like that. This was 6 or 7 years ago. And then you think about what you just said.
Well, we're at our infancy. Because I think about it, we've got a 1.1 exaflop computer in our skull using only 40 watts of energy.
Yeah, right.
I mean, think about how far we have to. I mean, a 1.1 exaflop computer today probably uses 1.1 million watts of energy. You know, and so we've got a long way to go. And that's what these exponential technologies, growing exponentially.
Right.
It's hard for us. We have a linear mindset. It's hard for us to conceive.
Exactly. That's so true.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you use linear mindset. The other thing that I was thinking about, again, not to get off on too much of a tangent, was thinking back in the 1970s and 80s and into the early 90s. I just remember like these growth curves of the availability of oil. And, certainly fossil fuels have their downside, and there's no question about it. But this curve that just said we're going to run out of oil by the year 2001, right? Yeah. And then you had, some really well-known economists talking about how you'll never really run out of oil because it'll become so expensive on a per barrel basis that we'll just find alternatives. And here we are, the latest challenges in the Strait of Hormuz notwithstanding, some of the cheapest oil we've had and cheapest oil-based products we've had in our lifetimes. So we think about things on a linear scale, the point being, and this is not how the world works, right? It is exponential, especially when it comes to these emerging technologies. You mentioned blockchain, you mentioned autonomous vehicles. What are the ones you have your eyes on?
Well, it's interesting. We're getting ready to celebrate our 250th anniversary as the United States of America.
Awesome.
And, I think back to our 100-year anniversary. Just imagine it's 1876.
Yeah.
There's no electricity.
Right.
There's no automobiles. There's no airplanes. There's no air conditioning. Hardly anybody's taking a hot shower. There's no internal plumbing. Einstein hasn't even written his papers yet on that'll lay the foundation for solid state physics and quantum physics and the atomic bomb. And you think about just think of all those technologies that came together that completely transformed the 20th century.
Right. Not on their own, but in collaboration with each other.
Of electricity and automobiles. I always think the 20th century, every industry was based on oil, electricity, and steel.
Right.
And as I look at the 21st century, I think that data is the new oil, artificial intelligence is the new electricity, and robotics is the new steel.
Interesting.
And it's that convergence of data, AI, and robotics. And I really do believe by 2035, there's only going to be two types of companies.
Yeah.
Those companies built on data, AI, and robotics, and those companies that are completely out of business.
Yeah, they will be. There's no doubt.
And so
it'll be sooner than that.
So, so now you look at today and, you've got AI, you've got robotics, you've got biotechnology, you got quantum computing that's coming, additive manufacturing, even atomically precise manufacturing, right? And it's those combinations that are the new, primary colors, if you will, and how they're going to intersect. But I think we're thinking about, I think, people think about humanoid robots, and I think there will be humanoid robots. But
as somebody who spent a week in China last August and we visited 8 humanoid robot companies, there will be. But
what I keep thinking about is the car is the robot. You know,
Right.
there's not a humanoid robot behind the wheel.
Right.
The car is the robot.
For sure.
You know, so I think we're going to see a manifestation. You know, I think robots are where AI was about 5 years ago. And I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see an explosion of robotics and
Right.
autonomous systems in every aspect of our life.
There's no question. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And it's just in kind of going back to some of the things that we saw in China. 26 tech companies in 6 days. Was there with the CEO of Ashley Furniture, Todd Wanek, and had him on the podcast last November-ish. I think that episode dropped in mid-December to talk about that trip, and it was just fascinating to see. The China part of it was fascinating. How quickly they're moving, how they built their economy around innovation, how coherent all of their innovation and all their companies were, how focused they were, how entrepreneurial they were. It was equal parts fascinating and scary. But I think the other part of it was the fact that we saw 26 of them in less than a week, right? So you just see all of this stuff spinning through your head, and then getting in the van and talking about what we just saw and what we were going to see. Just absolutely fascinating how quickly some of these technologies are moving. I agree with you. Right now, we want robots to do things that humans can do, everything from cooking, folding the laundry, sweeping the floor, whatever. And so we're creating humanoid robots that look like people because that's our model for it. You're absolutely right. We're going to find different applications and different technologies that allow a humanoid robot not necessarily to look like a person, but to perform the same things, maybe even better, in the same way that we've done in manufacturing in a lot of cases, more precise, faster, needing less rest, less energy, whatever you want to say. You'll see those same things in the evolution of humanoid robots.
Well, one of my biggest concerns, of course, Trump's coming back from China, and you probably have read the book Breakneck.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so,
Dan Wong. Yep.
Yeah, so you think about
he's got an open invitation to join us on the podcast.
He should come on because the American dream, I think, is risked by this idea that in China all their leaders are engineers, and in our country they're all attorneys.
Exactly.
And China's trying to figure out what they can build, and we try to keep figuring out what we can stop building because of the risk.
Absolutely.
And it's like, God, we've got to get over ourselves.
Totally.
We've got to start building things again as the United States of America.
Let me give you another example because it's really fresh in my mind. I spent the last 2 weeks as we record this. It's a Friday afternoon. I was Monday night. I got back from Europe, and we spent 11, 12 days in the Netherlands and in Belgium. And I was absolutely amazed at the absence of, not always in a good way, but I think a lot of times in a good way, like some of the safety things that we are so bent over here in the United States. I visited a castle. It was an 11th or 12th century castle, maybe a little bit later than that. It might, not too much later, 12th or 15th century in Ghent. You can look it up, in Belgium. And you're walking along this wall that is 35, 40 feet above the ground next to you, and it's as wide as the studio we're sitting in. So the wall is probably 8 feet wide. There's no fencing, and there's like 3-year-old kids running around up there with their parents. It was crazy. We were driving. We spent. If you ever been to Amsterdam, bikes everywhere, right? Yeah. 12,000 bikes a year are pulled out of the canals in Amsterdam, right? That's not how many bikes are there. That's how many they pull out of the canals because they got lost. Bikes are everywhere.
And they're probably tourists.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. It's 7 or 8 cars a year, too, by the way. And they said just as a quick aside, they said they had a rash of cars falling into the canals when they introduced Teslas to Amsterdam because they were using the self-parking car feature, and the cars didn't know how to park next to a wall that was next to 12 feet of water. So these cars were backing themselves into the canals, which is kind of funny. They've since solved for that. But the point of this was you have people driving around with 3 and 4-year-old, 2 and 3-year-old kids in these gigantic baskets on the front of their bikes, driving through traffic, whatever, no helmets. No safety, anything. And it was, as a cyclist, it was a little bit unnerving. But just the attitude there around safety, totally different than what we're accustomed to. Not to mention what I saw in China, which is,
Yeah, and I don't want to diminish the importance of safety, but at the same time, I think it creates kind of a culture of victimitis. If somebody somewhere has got to take care of me, versus taking personal accountability, right? And I think that's kind of what we're missing is we're losing that culture of accountability and trading it for culture of victimitis.
Right. Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
I always get in these, and I don't want to go down the political track,
go
but I
ahead.
always get in these conversations with people about what's happening in the United States. And
Right.
I always say to them, you know what the problem is? The problem is me.
Yeah, go
The
ahead.
problem is you.
Right.
The problem is everybody out there. It says we the people, right? And we seem to abdicate our responsibility for taking action,
Right.
and just expect somebody somewhere to do something.
Absolutely. Have you read the greatest sentence ever written, Walter Isaacson?
No.
That is such a good. I'll name
I
him.
love
My
Walter
good buddy
Isaacson.
Andy
He's great,
Barrio
yeah.
suggested.
Oh.
Actually, asked me if I'd read the book.
Yeah,
I said
I
I haven't
will.
read the book. He brought it to me. And he brought me a copy. It's a quick read. I read it on a plane flying from, I think, the East Coast back to Wisconsin. So it took me an hour. And but it talks about, I'm not going to give it away, greatest sentence ever written, and really talks about the founding principles of our country. Speaking of the 250th anniversary of the country and the Declaration of Independence in 1776, and that's what the book is based on. It's a really, really good book, and it speaks to exactly what you're talking about: is how our mindset and how our society has changed over the course of that. And I think there's some things that we can learn, certainly from China. There's things that we can learn from from the time that we spend in Europe, and I think is one of the important aspects of traveling is seeing how other cultures are adopting some of this stuff. But on the topic of learning from other cultures, on the topic of learning from subject matter experts, we spend a lot of time here on the Tech Ed Podcast. It's right in our name, technical education. Let's focus on that a little bit. You think about these emerging technologies. What should we be teaching in technical education? You think about humanity-centric innovation. What should we be teaching in technical education or STEM education? Wax on that a bit.
Yeah, two things I would say there. One is that I really firmly believe that once artificial intelligence exceeds human intelligence, which it will,
Yep.
we're going to find out that EQ is more important than IQ.
Yeah, well, it's all we have.
And when I talk about EQ, it's not just emotional intelligence. It's ethical intelligence,
Sure.
empathetic intelligence, entrepreneurial intelligence, envisioning intelligence, evangelistic intelligence. But EQ is going to be more important than IQ. And I think even more important than EQ is AQ, which is the adaptive intelligence, our ability to adapt to change, our ability to be resilient. And that's what we need to be teaching our kids, is how to think, how to critically think, how to be curious. I think curiosity beats memorization every day of the week, right? And our whole school system was built for what I talked about before, is oil, electricity, and steel. And we need a school system built on data, AI, and robotics.
Awesome. I love
and
that.
That's the shift that we've got to make, is from IQ to EQ to AQ.
That's beautiful.
And the other thing I would say is I would challenge us a little bit on STEM as well. So, we talk about STEM to STEAM, and introducing the arts.
Yep.
Whether you say STEM or STEAM, I'd like to see it raised to the power of E.
Okay.
And that E is ethics.
Yep.
Because we shouldn't be just asking, can we build it? We should be asking, should we build it?
Right.
And who are we building it for?
Yep.
And I think that's what needs to be taught in schools. I always think culture is basically values and behavior consistently displayed.
Yep.
And so what values and behaviors are we teaching?
Yep.
And I think if we can focus on values and behaviors consistently over time, that lays the foundation for a new society.
Absolutely.
And that's really what schools should be teaching, is what I call STEAMY and EQ and AQ.
Yeah, absolutely.
And really fostering curiosity in the mind. One of the things I'm concerned about is, I saw this thing that 50% of our day is spent staring at a screen.
Yeah, for sure.
Whether it's your iPhone, your iPad, your Kindle, your computer at work, your TV at home, this program you're watching right now on YouTube.
Yeah, if you're going to cut something out, don't make it this one. Start somewhere else.
But we're losing the art of what you and I are doing right now is just having a conversation, looking eyeball to eyeball, and having a discussion or having a debate or even disagreeing, but still being friends.
Yep.
And that's the other thing that we've got to teach in school is how to connect and communicate and collaborate. I'll just go on a real side note just for a second. I won't go too deep on this. But human beings have been around for 200,000 years. the first 130,000 years, we lived basically like animals.
Yeah.
There was no progress at all in the fossil record.
I have some friends that still live like animals, but that's another story.
Yeah, my wife says I live like an animal. But, 70,000 years ago, something happened. It's known as the cognitive revolution of the Great Leap. And what archaeologists tell us is there was an explosion of art and tools and human migration. Mm-hmm. And what anthropologists tell us is we learned to talk. We discovered speech. We invented language.
Yep.
And every time we've changed how we connect, communicate, and collaborate, our world has changed. Whether it was learning to talk or to write or mathematics or the printing press, radio, TV, internet, World Wide Web, social media, large language models, every time we've changed how we connect, communicate, and collaborate, our world has fundamentally changed. And with AI, we are going to see a step change.
Absolutely.
In all three of those things.
No question.
And
already seeing it.
It'll largely be like what it was like 70,000 years ago, going from, nothing to an explosion of creativity and curiosity.
Yeah, amazing.
And that's what we need to prepare our children for.
For sure. Lots there. Did you see the article, by the way, that they determined that Neanderthals were able to do root canals? Did you see this?
No.
So literally, I just read this. I can't remember where I saw it. But and it was just this week, that they found evidence, and it was true, that they found a tooth in some cave where they knew that the Neanderthals had lived. And they found a tooth, and it was clear that the tooth had been drilled into. And they did the research and figured out what kind of, they actually mimicked or repeated how they used a stone that was available to Neanderthals. This was 45,000 years ago, right? 45,000 years ago. So they were doing dental work on each other literally 45,000 years ago using this stone that they could use to drill into a tooth. So somebody had a tooth that had an infection. They figured out how to do a root canal, which just baffled me.
Well, we always focus on the conflict that people have, but I think compassion and empathy.
Yeah.
I mean, think about your day. Yep. Most of your day is spent being compassionate and caring and empathetic for others.
Yep.
It's only until you turn on the news that you're,
that's true. Or jump on TikTok or YouTube Shorts or whatever, algorithm is driving you out to the fringe. Absolutely.
The dopamine addiction, right?
Totally true. Yeah. So, a couple of the things that you mentioned. The first thing, and this was just, again, having spent 2 weeks in Europe, I won't give you the numbers because they're embarrassing, but I get a report every Sunday morning about my previous week's screen time on my iPhone. Not everything, not my computer, not my, just on the iPhone. And that number was cut by 2/3 the 2 weeks I spent in Europe. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. I'm like, what was I not doing? What I was not doing was spending excess time on X. What I was not doing was, playing a game of internet backgammon, which I have a propensity to do from time to time. I wasn't scrolling on YouTube Shorts. I was spending less time on going through emails and so on. And what was I doing more of? Having dinner with friends, spending time on my bike, learning about windmills, visiting a castle, spending time on a boat on the canal. And we can't do that every week. Obviously, we've got to work in order to be able to do those kind of things once or twice a year. But there's a lot of leisure time that gets blown just doom scrolling and wasting time.
I think one of the things that we're robbing children of is daydreaming.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I remember that mind-numbing boredness in the back seat of my car, my parents' car, staring out the window, just daydreaming.
Right.
And think, who has time? Who does that anymore? And that's something we need time to dream.
Yeah. I'll throw out a couple things. If you haven't seen it, the 60 Minutes interview with Ben Sass, who's a former senator from the state of Nebraska, now suffering from stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He doesn't have much time left. He said himself he's not going to see the end of the year. Super sad, young guy, relatively speaking. But one of the most impactful interviews I've watched in the last 5 years. We'll ask Melissa to link that up in the show notes because it's worth. I passed it along to bunches of people. It's just really, really good. One of the things that he says in that interview, he said the average 15 to 35-year-old male this year is more likely to have current online gambling debt than to read a book. Think about that. And I love to read. and I read probably 2/3 fewer books. I still read a ton of books, but I spend 2/3 probably less time reading than I did 10 years ago, which is a shame. So that's another thing that I'm working on getting better at. You talk about the ethics and the power of E and the power of A. We've brought it up a bunch of times on the podcast. Genesis, the book by Henry Kissinger. I don't know if you've read that. You mentioned Google before. He co-wrote it with, and Kissinger passed away a year and a half ago.
Oh, on AI?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
It is. He has there's a whole sentence in there. I use it all the time. And when you talk about artificial, not just artificial general intelligence where we are now, but super intelligence where literally AI can reason at a rate better and faster than a human being can, and we are going to get there.
All of humanity.
Yeah, right. Exactly. We're going to get there relatively quickly. And his line in that book was, we would prefer no intelligence to even one AI that had intelligence that was inconsistent with human values. I'm paraphrasing, but it's about that same thing. There's a whole section in there. The last probably quarter of the book is around ethics in the age of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, well, I just recently read a book that the title is "If Anyone Invents It, We All Die." And that's about AGI.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it will, if we don't use it properly, it certainly will. I don't know that we will. I think there's a possibility, a strong possibility that we're going to figure this out and we're going to do it right, but it isn't going to happen on accident. Right. And a lot of times we talk a lot about the importance of educating students around physical AI, applied artificial intelligence, ethical artificial intelligence. And the reason is that people of conscience need to be able to control these technologies, or the people that don't have conscience are going to. And in that case, we will.
Well, I think of AI as augmented intelligence.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's augmenting our intelligence and helping us to ask better questions. It's not, that's what I always think is the difference between science and technology. Technology is the answers.
Yeah.
Science is coming up with the right questions.
Yeah, good.
And we need to come up with the right questions, because AI is going to help us with the answers.
Yep, absolutely. There's no question. I love that. Talking about education, any schools that you've been involved with that you think are figuring out this whole idea of technology, human-centric innovation?
Been really fortunate. So when I left industry in 2023, I decided to seek my renaissance, not my retirement. So
okay, nice.
Writing the book is part of the renaissance
Yeah.
and so forth. And part of that renaissance, the last 3 years, I've been on the executive advisory board for Stanford University's
Awesome.
High Impact Technology Fund.
Okay.
And every project, I'm under a NDA, but what I'm sharing would be covered by that. But
Right.
every single project I would describe as humanity-centric innovation.
Cool.
It's solving an important problem for society at the intersection of business and technology.
Awesome.
And advanced technologies.
Yeah.
And
Is
so,
this a venture capital fund, or what's the model?
Yeah. So well, what they're looking at, what we're doing in the executive advisory board is helping them to prioritize their projects, and then helping to decide which projects should go out to get funding.
Okay.
Which ones are the most fundable projects.
Got it.
That Stanford can then launch.
Okay.
And
awesome.
it's been a great experience.
Mm-hmm.
But Stanford is really at the top of the list for me in companies that are really following what I'll call humanity-centric innovation.
Awesome.
I also had a real opportunity to work with the Haas School of Business at Berkeley as well when I was at KC.
Yeah.
And I would say the Haas School of Business, especially around sustainable development, they're another leading edge educational institution in the area of what I would call humanity-centric innovation.
Excuses to fly
to California.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's funny, every advisory board is like between December and March.
Yeah, right, exactly.
No, that's cool. Those are some obviously
but those
very,
are
very
great
impressive
examples.
institutions. So appreciate you sharing that as well. So I could have this conversation for another 3 hours. I'm not sure the audience would listen that long. We're kind of got to manage to a window. Although I bet they probably would, because this has been a really interesting conversation. If I'm an employer and running an organization, recruiting talent, with all of these things that we're talking about, converging technologies, exponential technologies, artificial intelligence, ethics and AI, human-centric innovation, what should I be thinking about in terms of recruiting that next generation of talent?
Yeah, well, I think that one is, again, it gets back to being clear on your purpose as an organization, and then being able to communicate it. But it's more than that. When I look at sustainable development, there's kind of 3 levels of sustainability. The lowest level is, what's the minimum I have to do to just keep my license to operate and not be thrown in jail? And quite frankly, that's where a lot of companies operate, is what's the minimum I have to do
Yeah.
And the more sophisticated ones wrap that with maybe a sustainability report so
Yep.
that their shareholders and customers and talent can see what they're doing.
Got it.
At the other end of the spectrum are NGOs, which are like, don't you just understand we got to do this for our children's children?
Right.
Don't really care about the business model per se.
Non-governmental organizations.
Yeah, non-governmental
NGO,
organization. But in the middle is what I call humanity-centric innovation,
Okay.
which is doing sustainability in a way that creates competitive advantage. Because once you create competitive advantage, you actually achieve all three.
Right.
You keep your license to operate and you do what's right for the planet. And that's what companies need to be able to communicate to young people, is that they're actually doing all three because they're seeing sustainability as a business model that creates competitive advantage. You know, Philip Crosby wrote a book in 1989 called Quality is Free.
Okay.
And at the time, everybody said, wait a minute, quality is expensive.
Yeah.
But what he said is that if you do it right the first time, quality is free.
Yep.
Well, I believe sustainability is free. If you can do it with less water, less energy, less materials, less waste, less harm,
Sure.
sustainability actually becomes free. And that's what humanity-centric innovation is all about. And that's what you need to be able to communicate to Gen Z, is that you're creating businesses that improve people's lives in an economically viable way and helping them to become a billionaire
There you go.
by helping a billion people.
Helping a billion people. That's absolutely perfect. And I think you think about, first of all, this idea of sustainability, and a lot of times people tie that directly to environmental sustainability. It's certainly super, super important, but it's also about creating a sustainable business model at the same time.
Oh, yeah,
That's
it's people,
exactly
planet, and prosperity,
Yeah.
right? And it's prosperity for the business as well as others.
which is exactly what you just described. So super, super fascinating on that front. Time for two more questions.
Okay.
If you have it, and they're questions we love asking all of our guests here on the Tech Ed podcast. We all have our own educational journey, our own path through education. I have mine. I just had somebody ask me earlier today, how do you learn? And we talked all about kind of my educational journey and how I learned and what didn't work for me as well. And so through that journey, we end up with these understandings and perspectives on education that may be a little bit less than conventional. Do you have anything that you think about that when it comes to education that our audience should hear about?
You know, what I always think about is, if this circle is everything I know in the world, everything outside that circle to the edges of the universe is everything I don't know.
Sure.
Right? And Einstein said it best, is that when the area of your knowledge increases, the perimeter of your ignorance increases as well.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing that we need to help people understand, is that the bigger your area of knowledge is, the bigger the perimeter of ignorance becomes, and to stay curious, to stay humble, and to always be learning.
Yep.
And that would be the biggest message I would have for somebody coming up through school, is to really be curious and to realize that you're not going to get out of school and stop learning. It's a lifelong learning event. So it's just like from 0 to 3rd grade, you learn to read.
Right.
From 3rd grade on, you read to learn.
Yeah.
Well, school is teaching you how to learn. And you need to be able to use that through the rest of your life to continue to learn, to continue to grow, and to really broaden your perimeter of ignorance, if you will,
Absolutely.
so that you always stay humble and want to learn. That to me is the key.
I love that focus on curiosity. When Todd Wannock, the CEO of Ashley Furniture Industries, was on the podcast, he's been on, I think, 3 times. But the last time that he was on, he talked about, or I should say that, second to last time he was on, and we talked about, when you're looking for people in your organization to drive your AI innovation, how do you pick the right people? He said you just find people who are curious. He said that's the number one, more so than education background, more so than than any of the work experience they have. If you find people that are curious, those are the people that are going to lead AI innovation. Barbara Humpton at the time was the chief executive officer of Siemens USA. Asked her a similar question, and her answer was, if you have curiosity and initiative, the world is yours, which we just
love that.
Yeah.
When I was about 12 years old, I went to Greenfield Village outside Detroit.
Yeah.
And Menlo Park had been moved there. And they had this guy dressed up as Thomas Edison. And he told this story, and it's stuck with me my whole life.
Yeah.
And what he said was, when Thomas Edison was looking to hire a new engineer, he would pull out a light bulb, and he would ask them, how much water does this light bulb hold? And the first type of engineer would take all these precise measurements and do a calculation and tell them what the volume was.
Yep.
And he wouldn't hire those engineers.
Yeah.
The second type of engineer would take the light bulb, pour it into a graduated cylinder and say, here's the volume of the light bulb.
Uh-huh.
He wouldn't hire those engineers.
Okay.
He would hire the engineer that would say, why do you want to put water in a perfectly good light bulb?
Exactly. That's awesome.
And that's always stuck with me. And that is the curiosity. I mean, it's like,
sure.
why do you want to do that?
Yeah,
What problem does it solve?
Yeah.
I work with companies on AI all the time, and they ask me, hey, where do we use AI? And I'm like, that's the wrong question. What business problem are you trying to solve? And what value does it create once you solve the problem? And you have the data to actually solve the problem. Now we can talk about AI.
Yep, absolutely. That's fantastic. And so the second question, and it actually goes back to that same age that you were, roughly, when you met the version of Thomas Edison there at Menlo Park. And that is this, if you could go back in time to that age when you're a sophomore in high school, you're a 15-year-old young person, right? And every year that goes by, that's a little further away from me.
Yeah.
But let's say you could go back in time and give that individual one piece of advice with their whole life in front of them. What would you tell them?
Oh, that's really good. I guess what I would tell them is don't be afraid. Everything's going to work out. Have the courage to be yourself and always tell the truth. I think, my dad gave me that advice when I was about to hire into Dow Chemical.
Mm-hmm.
The Sunday before I went to Dow, scared to death. Going to go work in epoxy resins. I didn't know anything about epoxy resins. And I remember calling my dad and just saying, it's that whole imposter syndrome.
Right.
It's just like, and I was like, Dad, what do I, and my dad said, all you ever have to do is to always be yourself and always tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what? Is that it? Yeah, that is, he was like, that is it. Yep. Always have the courage to be your authentic self and always tell the truth no matter what is going on.
Right.
And when I walked in that first day at Dow Chemical, I felt like I had a suit of armor on.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
My dad said, all I have to do is just be myself and tell the truth.
Right.
And I think I'd go and give that 15-year-old self that advice.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. Everything's going to work out. Be your authentic self and just always tell the truth.
Yep, absolutely. One, it seems like you've done that your entire career, and actually it did work out and worked out pretty well, and continues to work out as you continue to live out this incredible mission that you have going on, and certainly some people retire to go spend time fishing and hang out with the grandkids. Nothing wrong with that, but certainly you're showing that you can have this whole second opportunity to impact the world and change the world, maybe even ways that were greater than when you were in the workforce, and really, really impressive.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to get the message out, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you've got a great message. And the fact that, and I'll also mention that, we love every guest here on the podcast. Some come with a whole stack of notes based upon the topics that they think they might hear. And you sat down here, your notebook's behind you. All this was, off the top of your head, which is beautiful, genuine, always telling the truth as you said you would. Pete Dulcamara, scientist, former vice president of corporate research at Kimberly-Clark, and the author of High Tech Heroes, which we are going to link up in the show notes. Awesome conversation. You're a fascinating person. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate it.
And we are going to link up the show notes for this episode. Lots of resources we brought up. We'll put those at techitpodcast.com/Dulcamara. That is DULCAMARA. So check out the show notes there when you're done. Check us out on social. Don't spend too much time doing it because we're talking about limiting our screen time on this particular episode, but go and check us out on social media. We are on TikTok. We are on Instagram. We are on Facebook. We are on LinkedIn. Wherever you go to consume your social media, including YouTube. We're getting lots and lots of traction on the YouTube channel these days. Wherever you go to consume your social media, you will find the Tech Ed Podcast. When you do, reach out and say hello, and say hello to us again next week on the Tech Ed Podcast. We'll be right back here as we are each and every week. Until then, my name is Matt Kirkner. Thanks so much for being around.